Well, it takes someone 5 minutes to Google Jake Tapper, Donald Trump, to see that Jake Tapper has consistently, frequently likened President Trump to Adolf Hitler.
Ma'am, I'm going to stop this interview if you continue to attack my colleagues. I would like to talk about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who you work for.
Yes.
If you are here to speak on his behalf, I am willing to have this conversation.
I am stating facts that your colleagues have stated in the past.
Okay,
now,
I'm sorry, guys. We're going to come back out to the panel. Karoline, thank you very much for your time. You are welcome to come back at any point. She is welcome to come back and speak about Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will have equal time to Joe Biden when they both join us now at later this week in Atlanta.
Under the harsh studio lights, Karoline Leavitt sat down, prepared for battle. She knew this was hazardous territory, a program known for its intense debates, but she was ready to defend herself. What she didn't expect was a moment so explosive that it would upend one of the most influential television shows. And all of it was live. There was no editing, no safety nets, and no time for damage control. Just pure, unfiltered discussion. Karoline had been invited to take part in a heated debate on Morning Current, a high-stakes political talk show. At the top was media tycoon Paul Danning, known for his assertive, uncompromising approach. Rather than simply challenging his guests, he often dominated the conversation, shutting down criticism and shaping narratives to fit his perspective. But today, he wasn't in control. Facing him was Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative voice, sharp, composed, and unafraid to push back. She knew exactly what she was walking into, and she came prepared. From the moment the cameras rolled, Danning set the tone. He accused conservative media of spreading misinformation and questioned her stance on media bias. Networks like his, he insisted, weren't pushing an agenda. They were simply correcting the record. The talking points were familiar, but this time, Karoline wasn't backing down. She made a split-second decision. Rather than staying on the defensive, she countered with concrete examples of media misrepresentation, stories that had omitted key details or skewed narratives. The discussion was sharp but professional, the kind of fast-paced exchange viewers had come to expect. For a while, it seemed like just another debate. Then, something changed. Paul leaned in, his face tightening, his tone growing sharper. The energy in the studio shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't just a heated discussion. It was personal. His frustration broke through, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge. "People like you," he said firmly, his expression unreadable. "You push this false narrative of victimization while silencing others. You claim conservatives are being censored, but in reality, you're the ones controlling the conversation." Silence fell over the studio. The usual rhythm of debate had been replaced by something heavier, more intense. Karoline held his gaze, unwavering. She had handled difficult interviews before, but this was different. A moment passed before she spoke. "I disagree," she said, her voice measured but resolute. And just like that, the debate had reached a turning point, one that no one had seen coming.
It's very easy to speak truth from this podium when you have a president who is implementing policies that are wildly popular with the American people, and that's exactly what this administration is doing. It's correcting the lies and the wrongs of the past 4 years, many of the lies that have been told to your faces in this very briefing room. I will not do that.
Paul, if anything, took a step back. Your real objective is to control your people, yet you act as though free speech is being challenged. He couldn't stop himself. The mood in the studio had already shifted, but the producers, who had been idly watching the segment, exchanged uneasy glances. Karoline responded, "Would you like to clarify what you mean by your people?" She didn't raise her voice or interrupt. Sensing the tension in the studio, what had started as a typical political debate had turned into something entirely different, something that could go viral in minutes. Crew members who had previously been focused on routine tasks were now visibly tense. The air in the room grew heavier. Paul hesitated. A single second of silence on live TV could make or break a career. The cameras kept rolling, capturing everything for the internet to see. There was no edit button, no PR team rushing in for damage control. Paul Danning, a seasoned media veteran who built his career on controlling conversations, was now in unfamiliar territory. Steering discussions, interrupting opponents, and setting the narrative had been his trademarks. But this was different. This was a loaded comment, one that, if clipped and posted online, would be analyzed, scrutinized, and replayed endlessly. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue or a poorly chosen phrase. Karoline knew this. Instead of reacting, she let the silence work in her favor. She folded her hands in her lap, leaned back in her chair, and waited. Paul had a choice: clarify or double down. He inhaled deeply, his response almost too quick, as if trying to regain control. The Conservatives. Karoline's expression didn't change, but she tilted her head slightly and spoke with deliberate clarity. Just to be clear, she said slowly, when you said your people, you were referring only to political ideology. Paul exhaled sharply. People like you, he continued, his tone edged with frustration, are more focused on grievances and progress. Paul had been in the industry long enough to recognize a trap. He knew the audience saw it too. His jaw tightened. If he pushed back too forcefully, he risked confirming the very perception he wanted to avoid. But if he backed down, he'd look weak the moment had already passed. If he admitted his mistake now, he'd appear unsteady. So, he pivoted. Oh, Karoline, don't play the victim. This kind of bad faith argument is exactly what I'm talking about, he scoffed, forcing a dry laugh and shaking his head. Karoline didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let him shift the conversation. Paul, your words speak for themselves. The air in the room was thick with tension, but this was just the beginning. Across from her, something flickered across Paul's face, irritation, maybe even a trace of regret. But it was too late to walk it back. He had to commit, and that's when he made the fatal mistake. You know what? He snapped, his voice sharper now, his frustration breaking through. Maybe if Conservatives spent less time playing the victim and more time actually contributing something to society, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There it was, a sweeping, dismissive statement, spoken in a moment of unchecked frustration, and it was broadcast live for the entire world to hear. The silence that followed was instant and suffocating. Not just in the studio, but on the other side of the screen, where thousands, soon to be millions, were watching in real time. Even Paul seemed to realize the weight of his words the second they left his mouth. His lips parted slightly, as if to soften the blow, to reframe, to take it back. But it was too late. Karoline let the weight of his remarks linger before delivering the final blow. Are you implying that Conservatives don't contribute to society? Paul rolled his shoulders back, exhaling quickly, his irritation barely concealed. I'm saying that this constant complaining about being cancelled is undoing the progress already made. Karoline nodded slowly, expressionless. She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. And within minutes, it was everywhere. The clip spread like wildfire. Social media went into overdrive the moment the show ended. The first footage and transcripts hit Twitter. A 15-second clip spread across Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, just long enough to ignite outrage, spark conversations, and take the internet by storm. Within an hour, the hashtag #FireDanning was trending. Another, #MediaBias, soon followed. Karoline had been right. Paul had lost control of the narrative, and social media was running with it. Debates erupted across Twitter. The full-length video did not strengthen Paul's case. It only made his remarks clearer. This wasn't just a misstep. It was a frustrated outburst that revealed his true thoughts. TikTok users stitched reaction videos. Facebook and YouTube comment sections became battlegrounds. Some rushed to defend Paul, claiming his remarks were taken out of context and that the outrage was manufactured. Others swiftly condemned his words, accusing him of media elitism and arrogance. Political commentators from both sides weighed in. Some labeled Paul as just another out-of-touch media figure ignoring millions of people. Others dismissed the backlash as selective outrage. Regardless, people were paying attention. By midday, 3 major morning current advertisers had pulled their sponsorships, issuing carefully worded statements about reviewing their commitments to the network. They didn't explicitly denounce Paul, but it was clear they wanted no association with the controversy. More brands watched closely, waiting to see if the backlash would subside or intensify. It only grew. By evening, 8 advertisers had withdrawn. What had begun as a simmering controversy had erupted into a full-blown PR crisis. At Morning Current headquarters, it was all hands-on-deck damage control. Karoline didn't have to say a word. She simply retweeted the viral clip with a single thinking face emoji. A small move, but it spoke volumes. And the storm wasn't even close to over. Inside NBS News, the network behind Morning Current, Paul Danning remained silent. But behind the scenes, executives were scrambling. Viewers flooded their inboxes with emails demanding action. Advertisers weren't just suspending sponsorships anymore. They were cutting ties. For rival networks, this was blood in the water. Segments about media bias and journalistic accountability cited Paul's comments as a prime example. What had started as an on-air outburst had become a real-time case study in self-destruction. By mid-morning, the situation was untenable. An emergency meeting was called. NBS News had a choice: stand by Paul and risk long-term damage, or cut ties and deal with the fallout. Paul had been one of their most recognizable faces, a veteran journalist known for his tough, uncompromising interviews. But by 3 p.m., he was a liability. The decision was made. A statement was released: Paul Danning has been suspended indefinitely as we conduct an internal review of yesterday's broadcast. NBS News remains committed to fair, respectful journalism. The internet wasn't buying it. Calls for outright termination grew louder. Karoline wasn't leading the charge, but she wasn't stopping it either. That night, she appeared on another talk show. The inevitable question came: do you think Paul Danning should be fired? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. By 9:15 a.m. the next day, NBS News made its final decision. A second statement was released: those in positions of influence must be accountable for their words. While we acknowledge Paul Danning's contributions over the years and wish him well, he is no longer affiliated with NBS News. Paul Danning was gone, but the controversy wasn't, and the conversation had only just begun. Condescending mannerisms have long been a feature of mainstream media, but from the other side, they saw something very different. The pinnacle of cancel culture was reached when Paul Danning was fired, a man losing his job due to one mistake or statement. What happened at the debate? Where is the context now? When the story was released by conservative media, right-wing pundits seized upon it, claiming Karoline Leavitt was responsible for the downfall of Paul Danning. Even while left-leaning individuals kept their distance from Paul, not everyone was happy with the way things turned out. Even his detractors recognized the bigger problem. If a seasoned journalist could be fired in a day, who would be the next to go? The argument had intensified. Back-to-back programs by Fox News, The Daily Wire, and Newsmax examined the dismissal, the criticism, and the broader ramifications. The emphasis shifted away from Paul Danning himself and towards the boundaries of free speech and media accountability. Was this an appropriate penalty for a public figure who went too far, or was it a message to everyone who dared to challenge the status quo? Then, late one evening, Paul Danning released a pre-recorded video statement on social media, breaking his silence. Despite his controlled tone and visibly tired appearance, his message was concise and direct. Since the media values conformity over the truth, I lost my job for speaking my mind. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. If you step over the line, you're out. If you challenge the narrative, they erase you. The video quickly gained millions of views online, attracting both supporters and critics. His supporters emphasized his claims of being unjustly silenced, while conservative circles called for boycotts of NBS News, encouraging viewers to stop watching the network altogether. To them, this wasn't just about a journalist losing his job, it was proof that the establishment could not tolerate opposing viewpoints. However, the criticism wasn't one-sided. Danning's opponents countered by arguing that this wasn't an infringement on free speech. They claimed that Karoline Leavitt had merely posed a question, and Paul had responded in a way that led to his own career's downfall. In the days that followed, as the dust settled, it became clear that the controversy was not going away. Some insisted that Paul's dismissal was a long overdue correction for someone who had long used divisive rhetoric to control discussions, not a political hit job. Media outlets organized roundtable discussions and op-ed panels to analyze the recent events. Was this a historic moment of censorship or justice? Was it proof that the norms of journalism were evolving? Some contended that Paul's dismissal was motivated by professionalism rather than free expression, stating that words have consequences. But the larger question remained: what does this mean for the future of political discourse, debate, and journalism? Are we silencing people for holding the wrong beliefs? Or are we simply holding them accountable for their words? Others saw something even more concerning. They warned that the precedent being set was more significant than Paul Danning himself. If a journalist of his stature could be removed in a single day, who else might be next? Were the lines between appropriate conversation and unacceptable speech becoming increasingly blurred? The dispute extended well beyond Karoline and Paul. What began as a heated exchange between a journalist and a guest had morphed into a larger conversation about the fragility of public discourse, the influence of social media in shaping reality, and the power of viral outrage. It became a case study in public accountability, media ethics, and the growing influence of online mobs. Paul was out, but he wasn't finished. A month later, he launched his own YouTube show, branding himself as an independent truth-teller who had been silenced by the establishment. His following grew larger than ever as he leaned into the narrative that had formed around him, portraying himself as a victim of a system that punished those who questioned the dominant narrative. For his supporters, he became a champion of free speech, daring to take on the powerful media establishment. His critics, however, saw him as a provocateur capitalizing on outrage and reframing his own failure as an opportunity to build a new platform. Meanwhile, Karoline moved on, giving a few interviews but never focusing on the controversy. However, her name would always be tied to this moment. And there is little doubt that this will not be the last time such a situation arises. The headlines will repeat themselves. But what happens when the next scandal breaks? When another public figure says the wrong thing at the wrong time? Who decides the limits? The question of which side you'll take will still be there when the outrage machine starts up again. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Was Paul's termination justified? Was this an example of cancel culture taken too far? Or was it simply the right consequence at the right time? Did this incident reveal a new form of crowd control over free speech? For more stories that push the boundaries of debate, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts below. See you in the next one.